Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 3 of HSGPod. We are again this week going inside the HSG with a recap of the Albacete meeting from the perspective of the working group leaders. So while in episode 2, we chatted with Dr. Ricardo Insausti, who was the driving force of the organization of the meetings and the hands-on dissections, the driving force of the progress made for the HSG's goals were the working group leaders. So that said, today we will be joined by Dr. Jenna Adams from the University of California, Irvine in the Department of Neurobiology and Behavior, who is the working group leader for the MTO Cortex working group. And we're also joined by Dr. Marshall Dalton at the University of Sydney in the School of Psychology and the Brain and Mind Center, who is the working group leader for the hippocampal head. So I'm excited to have them join us, and I hope that you enjoy their recap. So hi to both Jenna and Marshall. Thank you both so much for joining us. Normally, Hannah would be here, and I can say that we are sincerely thrilled to have you both willing and able to recap your perspectives on the Albacete meeting that we had earlier in the summer and the efforts of each of your working groups as we move into the fall semester. Because much like I know things are in full swing for all other aspects of the life, you both stay busy with your working group efforts.
Yeah, thank you for inviting us on, Kelsey. We're excited to talk about our Spain meeting.
Yes, I'll echo that sentiment. Thank you for having us.
Of course. So for both of you and the time that you're taking today, what I think would be extremely helpful for the larger HSG community and all of our members is if you could maybe start with giving us a summary of the efforts of your working groups thus far and sort of your current goals. So the current mission, if you will, just so we have an understanding about moving out of the hippocampus totally with Jenna and moving more anterior into the hippocampal head, which is a little bit messier with Marshall, what that looks like, because I think most people are very familiar with the efforts of the hippocampal body, but not so much in our other endeavors. So for this one, I'm going to have you kick us off, Marshall.
Okay, thank you. That's a very nice introduction to go into the hippocampal body. First, so we heard, I think, in the first podcast in this series that a really big focus of the HSG over the past few years has been to develop this approach to segment subfields in the body of the hippocampus. But in parallel with this, the hippocampal head working group has been focused on developing methods to segment subfields in these more anterior portions of the hippocampus. So we know that compared to the body of the hippocampus, as you just mentioned, the hippocampal head is incredibly complex. It has much more convoluted morphology, and this makes identifying subfields here incredibly challenging. So just to give an example of a particular challenge, in the body of the hippocampus, the location of subfields generally remains largely consistent along its anterior-posterior axis. And the body working group has developed a beautiful single geometric framework that allows us to really delineate these subfields across the entire body. Now, the hippocampal head is quite different because there are some really dynamic shifts in the shape of the hippocampal head along its anterior-posterior extent, and making it more complex, different subfields gradually emerge as we move from anterior to posterior. And the location of the subfields also doesn't maintain a consistent pattern, so we really need to apply different rules to segment subfields in the anterior, the middle, and the posterior portions of the hippocampal head. So the real primary goal of the hippocampal head working group is to develop a series of different geometric rules that we can apply to manually segment subfields along the anterior-posterior extent of the hippocampal head that reflects the ground truth of the complexity and is as accurate and reliable as possible as well.
It's quite the endeavor, having had a sneak peek, and I won't spoil anything that you're going to talk about later here. I know that you have put in a lot of time because unfortunately we don't have a Swiss roll in the hippocampal head like we do in the body, which makes it a little bit easier to take a bite out of what's actually going on there.
More of a Swiss mush in the anteriors.
Swiss mush is a good way to put it. All right, I'll pivot to you then, Jenna, if you want to give us a little summary of what you do as the head of the MTL cortex group.
Yeah, so like Kelsey mentioned, I'm leading the MTL cortex group. So like the goals of the hippocampus, our goal is to create a harmonized protocol for segmentation for medial temporal lobe cortex. So this includes the entorhinal cortex, the perirhinal cortex, which we're calling corresponding to Brodmann area 35, or the transentorhinal cortex, what we're calling the ectorhinal cortex now, which corresponds to Brodmann area 36, and then also the parahippocampal cortex. So although these are not the traditional hippocampal subfields with the group, these are really important regions for research. So to do this, we've been using annotated histology data from 4 different neuroanatomists that used like Nissl stains to use ground truth segmentations. And what we've been finding is it's not that straightforward, even looking at the histology. So I would just like to give a quick shout out to our first paper from this group. That's a preprint that was led by Hannah Baumeister and Annika Westerfield. I don't know if we can link it here in the video, but they put together a beautiful examination comparing the histology annotations from the 4 neuroanatomists to come to some sort of conclusion about, even on the histology, where these regions are appearing. So based on this histology, we've been working to try to find out both where these regions start and end, which we're calling ranging, and then moving on into segmentation boundaries between these regions. So that's been our focus so far.
Awesome. I know that has kept that group very busy, because it was not only moving outside of the hippocampus, which is how we pulled a lot of people in, but moving into the discrepancies that you might find upon histologists. So I know that the paper that you mentioned, and that I'll link here, really does a beautiful job of outlining what parameters your group is working within and how you're going to translate that out into your MTL segmentations we will see. So amazing. I know that she's not here, but normally we're joined by Hannah, and each of us were in one of your respective groups in Spain. So I know that we didn't get a full perspective individually about the efforts that happened in our intensive meeting rooms after the hands-on brain dissections, which I know was so cool.
Amazing.
And I know that you both, as we've chatted, have exciting plans for the future. But before we go into your next steps, I'm hoping we can take a pit stop and just do a little bit of a reflection about the approach that each of you took in your working groups at the Albacete meeting, and how the information that you actually gained in Spain has helped you with the goals that you both mentioned. Because as you know, not everyone could join us. So this just gives us a little bit of a look inside the HSG in the room where we were putting these efforts forward. So this time I will start with Jenna, and you can share a little bit about the MTL cortex group's work in Spain.
Sure, yeah, just to give a little bit of context, our working group is relatively new. We only established our formal working group of our 6 core members back in January. However, we did have meetings last year in Lund and in San Diego before SFN to start to talk about these things, but we didn't have consistent work being done until just this past year. So really what we've been focusing on leading up to the Spain meeting was looking at ranging roles for each of our regions. So that's where is the anterior most appearance of a region and the posterior most appearance of a region. And that may sound simple, but surprisingly, maybe not surprisingly, it hasn't been. And there's been a lot of, like I said, inconsistency on the histology data. So we've really been focusing on that the last few months. And leading into the Albacete meeting, we had a draft of our recommendations for these ranging protocols, but we really wanted the feedback of the larger working group and a lot of outside members who haven't been in our weekly, bi-weekly Zoom calls talking about this. So we had 3 major goals for our Spain meeting that I think we did successfully complete. So our first goal that we worked on was that our histology data, we only had every 5 millimeter information, which it's pretty coarse when you think about it. A lot changes within 5 millimeters in the brain. So we actually, in Spain, were able to access some more fine-grained histology information from Dr. Ricardo Insausti, which was really helpful. So we had a whole agenda looking at more detailed information on transitions between regions, which was really informative. The second goal and item we were focusing on in the Albacete meeting was that we were looking for MRI landmarks that corresponded to the histology information. So the ultimate goal of this, like we've been saying, is to translate this to segmentations that are achievable on MRI. And we don't have that same information we have in histology. So it was important to us to be able to consistently find landmarks across different participant examples, across different scans that reliably track with some of these anterior and posterior ranges of these regions. And then finally, our last goal that we touched upon, but we're still working upon, is not all labs acquire the same field of view of their high-res T2 for segmentation. Some really just focus on the area around the hippocampus. Some get all the way to the temporal pole. And we know these mediotemporal lobe regions do extend quite far anteriorly all the way to the pole sometimes. So we're trying to figure out, how do we approach segmentation protocols in labs that only acquire a limited field of view around the hippocampus? So that's a major action item that we're consistently working on to try to figure out recommendations for. So by the end of the Spain meeting, we actually ended up with a revised guideline for our segmentation and some good ideas for this truncated protocol. So we're hoping to finalize that within the next month or so. And we've been following up on that in our working group meetings to just do the little final details before releasing that. So we're excited. It was a great meeting.
Yeah, that's exciting. It's amazing what can happen when you put a bunch of people in the same room who all have focus and interest at the task at hand. So I'm happy to hear that in your room, because I wasn't in your room, that you were able to meet all those goals and make some great progress, not only for the working group, but for the HSG. All right, Marshall.
Yeah, so the hippocampal head working group has been around for a bit longer than the MTL group. I'm not sure exactly what year it's been running from, but I know over since at least 2018 there have been ongoing meetings. I was invited to lead the group, I think, in early 2022. And in relation to the Spain meeting, I mentioned earlier that we have developed these different geometric rules for delineating subfields along the anterior posterior extent of the hippocampal head. And prior to the Spain meeting, a lot of work had been done in really testing each of these rules on histological slices to assess how well each of the different rules align with subfields prior to the working group meeting in Spain. So our really two primary goals for the Spain retreat were to first assess how well these rules can be applied to MRI scans, because the ultimate goal is to use landmarks that we can identify on high-resolution MRI scans to segment the subfields. And also, very importantly, we wanted to get feedback from the broader HSG community regarding how clear and feasible the rules that we developed were in achieving that goal. So we did this by getting attendees at the Spain retreat to kind of systematically test how well each of the rules we've developed can be applied to a series of different structural MRI scans of decreasing image quality. So we started by applying the rules to these very beautiful high-resolution structural scans that were required on a 9.4 Tesla scanner. So this really gave us a best-case scenario of the image quality to test the series of geometric rules that we developed. We then tested each rule on high-resolution images acquired on a 3T scanner that were less clear, of course, than the 9.4T, but still of very good quality. And then we moved on to a series of more standard 3T images of differing qualities. So some were very clear, some were very noisy. And we did this to assess how well the rules can be applied to these scans that are more representative of real-world research and clinical scans. So by essentially applying this series of geometric rules to scans of decreasing quality, we systematically assessed where the rules work, where they began to break down, as the scan quality essentially diminished. And the real essential component, as I mentioned, was to get feedback from the HSG members who were attending. So in our working group in Spain, we divided attendees into 4 groups, and each group was assigned a specific set of scans to test the geometric rules on. And each group provided this really detailed, invaluable feedback on where they thought the rules worked, where they didn't work, and where more clarity was needed in describing certain aspects of the protocol. So overall, we did achieve this goal of attaining this critical feedback at the Spain retreat, and we're now using this to refine our series of geometric rules to improve the protocol that we're currently developing.
I'm very glad to hear that the feedback was useful. I know that there was so many conversations that were going on in our room about what should we focus on and what should we not focus on, because as you both know, and as I was watching know, what image quality we have and what features we can actually identify in a given scan can vary so widely. So I know that you were very sensitive to trying to make sure that the rules that you develop can actually be applied in the day-to-day of research, and not just those who have 7T data on the regular or really beautiful 3T, but people like me who tend to study developmental populations, and it's not always the prettiest, but they do their best. So
yeah, that's the key, and especially in the hippocampal head, I mean, that's generally susceptible to a lot more motion artifacts and just general noise in our T2 scans. So it's a very challenging area. And to make it more difficult, of course, and I'm sure Jenna might have something to add to this, but there are so many varying views amongst anatomists as to what the ground truth of these subfield boundaries actually is. And there's also a high degree of individual variability in the location of subfields and their boundaries in the hippocampal head, much more so than in the hippocampal body. So it's really a very challenging area to look at.
well, I know that you and the group are up to the challenge, and that was very clearly demonstrated in Spain with all of the preparation that you had and the progress that we made. I can't believe it's been like almost 2 full months, 2? Was it June?
Yes.
It was
Yeah.
June, yeah.
July,
What month? No, we're in August.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's almost September. So it's
Yeah.
time's flying
Coming up
by.
to 3 months, yeah.
So I know that for me, I've been able to attend a few of these, and same with you, having led them. But I want to reiterate, it's just such an amazing experience to sit in a room of fellow scientists who are focused on trying to move forward these goals that we are all coming to together, which is, I think, a very unique aspect of the HSG is the collegiality of these groups and our willingness to listen to each other. So Jenna, you mentioned that you had updated some of the labels based on what I had heard in San Diego. And Marshall, the whole purpose, or not the whole, but a major purpose, was to get feedback from people to help shape these things. So I hope that others have the opportunity to take part in these at some point, because it's just really a cool experience to see people who want to better science together. So we are starting to reach the end of our conversation today, and I wanted to end with next steps and upcoming efforts, because I know that each of you have plans with your respective working groups. And because I know these look slightly different for both of you based on, how long the group has been there and what the goals are, I'm going to have Jenna start, and then I'll have Marshall finish us up here.
Great. Yeah. So since Spain, like I mentioned, we've been working on just really finalizing these ranges, because we really just want to have these ranges set before we spend too much time on boundaries, because if the ranges change, the boundaries are going to change, So one thing we're actually actively talking about is whether we should share our draft protocol with the larger hippocampal subfield group community as a formal questionnaire to get feedback on these ranges before we spend too much time on other boundaries. And I think that would be a really great way to get feedback from the larger community, hear different perspectives, especially if we're proposing both potentially a full and a truncated protocol. So that's something that we're actively discussing right now. And hopefully we'll have at least our draft of the ranges done within the next month or so, and then talk about sharing that with the community. So stay tuned, that may be coming. A second upcoming goal for us is that we actually have the great opportunity to have an in-person core working group meeting coming up this October in Lund, Sweden. Unfortunately, this isn't one that's open to the larger community. We just had some extra funding left over from our meeting in Lund last year. So it'll support our 6 core working group members to all fly out and be in the same physical room together in Lund for 3 days. And while we can make a lot of progress on Zoom in our meetings, we really just make so much progress when we're in person together. And especially if we lock ourselves in a room for 3 days to focus on boundaries, I think we can make a lot of progress. So our goal for this Loon meeting is we're hoping to turn away from the ranging rules at that point and start talking about some other pressing issues. And one major agenda item I know we're going to have to spend a lot of time on that might be good for this 3-day intensive meeting is looking at collateral sulcus variability. So Marshall mentioned individual variability. There's a lot of individual variability with the anatomy of the collateral sulcus, such as depth and type. If it's continuous, it's continuous. And that's been shown to affect where the boundary is between the entorhinal cortex and the perirenal cortex. So we've been lucky enough to have access now to a lot more histology data from Dr. Ricardo Insausti, up to maybe 15, 20 scans. So we're hoping to have enough variability in both collateral sulcus anatomy and also participant demographics. So healthy adults, older adults, and then patients as well, to see how sulcal depth and variability contribute to the placement of this boundary on histology. And then we'll hope to use some of that information on creating our boundary between entorhinal cortex and perirenal cortex. So that's our goal for the Loon meeting coming up. And I'm sure we'll give a recap to the community on the progress from that meeting as well. So
I was just going to say, I can't wait to hear what comes out of that intensive meeting.
yeah.
And if I'm not mistaken, and if I'm lying to the group, I don't mean to, I think that there's going to be a webinar that, if not live during that,
Yes,
available
yes.
to the larger HSG to not necessarily, it's not going to be you guys sitting in a room looking, but it's going to be some topics covered that come out of that meeting that are more informational for
yeah, thank you for bringing that up, Kelsey. Yeah, I think we're planning to have each working group lead give an update on progress of the group so far and have some general updates as well. So that'll be a fun aspect of that meeting. It will be that community information dissemination. So we're excited to plan and host that webinar with your help, of course, Kelsey.
I'm excited that you guys are able to do that. It'll be great. And Marshall, next steps for the hippocampal head, the Swiss mush.
Yes. Well, we are currently incorporating the feedback that I just mentioned that we received from the Spain retreat. So we're in the process of just improving the protocol as it stands, the different geometric rules, and we're hoping to have an amended draft of the protocol ready by November for more formal reliability testing. So we're currently planning another face-to-face working group meeting in Washington on the 2 days prior to SFM this year. So that will be on November 9 and 10. And this will allow us just to get a final round of feedback from experts in the field. And like Jenna mentioned, for her group, this is going to be more focused on the core working group members. But we will be advertising the meeting because we will be interested to get insights from HSG members who have a bit more experience in segmenting hippocampal subfields. So if anyone's watching who has experience segmenting and would like to contribute to the meeting in Washington in November, please watch out for advertising that will be sent around through the HSG social media platforms, and feel free also to get in touch if you'd like more information.
Please do contact, and I can put your information either on the screen or in the description of this video, but we'll facilitate that endeavor because I know that feedback and collegiality is such an important part of our group.
And it's so much fun. Just going through. Oh, sorry, I think we've got a
No, you're good. It is fun.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun, and it's a real privilege to work with such a diverse group of passionate researchers as well, and really to devote time to exploring these really complex parts of the brain in general. So it's a really great endeavor to be involved with.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think I've mentioned the focus and the intensive efforts that we put forward in Albacete, and I know that have been there, but it really is so much fun to spend time with all of, with you both and with everyone else who attends. Maybe drink a little too much coffee and not drink enough water, but at the end of the day, we I think all feel very fulfilled, or at least I know I do when I'm interacting with our HSG working groups. It's such a fun experience.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, those meetings are definitely a highlight.
They really are. And it's been over a decade of the HSG, like Valerie was reminiscing on, and we're still going strong. And that really is thanks to people who are in these leadership positions in the working groups like both of you, as well as the people who are willing to take their time and dedicate them to the goals and efforts that you guys set forward. So I am just so impressed with what both of you have done in your endeavors as leaders of the HSG. And I'm so excited to see what comes out and what's in the pipeline. So I just want to thank you guys again, both for sharing some of the insights about the efforts that you have and all of your progress, really to give a little bit of insight into what goes into making the efforts of the HSG move forward.
Yeah, thank you for
Thanks
having
very
us,
much.
Kelsey. This has been really fun to reminisce on Albacete and discuss exciting next steps for both of our working groups.
Yeah.
Yep. Thanks, Kelsey. Thanks, Jenna. It's exciting to see what we'll achieve over the next year.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm glad that both of you are going to be able to have face-to-face time with your core groups. As much as it is fun to be on Zoom, I much prefer both seeing you in person and working in person as well.
Yeah.
All right. Well, with that, I'll thank you for joining us.
Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Kelsey. Bye.